Hello and welcome to another episode of Shattered Lives, the Irish Daily Star's crime podcast. I'm crime correspondent Michael O'Toole, and joining me now is our chief reporter Paul Healy. Hello Paul.
Hi Mick.
So last week we did our first crime review of the week and we got a very good response to it and we're very happy with it. Paul and I were keen to do it. It just lets us have a bit of space and time to reflect and maybe delve more into stories that we do throughout the week, because there's sometimes, like we're going to talk to Paul, he's been up and down to Cork the last couple of days, and sometimes we're running around the place and you have so many stories that you don't really have time. You go from one story to the next. Sometimes sadly you go from one murder to the next and you really are running around. So this format allows us maybe to talk about some of the cases that have been in the news for the whole week, and perhaps some of our listeners, some stories that our listeners may have missed as well. So we're going to start off, and I think we're going to keep on with this format. We'll do one normal podcast a week. I did I thought it was a very interesting interview with former Garda Assistant Commissioner Michael Sullivan, and then towards the end of the week we'll do this week in review. So this is our second week in review. Now, one of the things I'm very interested in talking about in this review is the case of a lady called Simone Lee. Now, Paul was in court the last couple of days in Cork in relation to what is a really shocking case of assault. So, Paul, you might tell us the background first.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a particularly horrendous assault, Mick. I was making the point that people do get assaulted nearly every day across the country, but this was a particularly harrowing case, and when we got wind of it, we felt that we needed to go down to Cork and give it national media attention, because what happened to Simone Lee was the kind of attack you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy, and unfortunately not the first time that she has been a victim of this type of assault. So a highly unusual case already, in that she was subjected to a really sustained lengthy attack. She was beaten to a pulp, kicked and punched and pushed to the ground, and she had ammonia acid and boiling hot water poured all over her by a man named Christopher Stokes. And as I said, what's surprising about that is that this is not the first time that she suffered an attack at the hands of a man in which boiling hot water was poured over her and she was beaten. And in the previous incident, she was stabbed as well by a totally separate assailant. And
when was that attack?
The first attack was in 2016, and that was by her then ex-boyfriend. It's quite shocking in that, and I spoke to Simone after the case today, and she told me that she believed that Christopher Stokes, who was a friend, somebody that she trusted, that she believed that Christopher Stokes copied off the previous incident, the original attack, that he had Googled what had happened to her, because if you Google her, you can see the previous case. He had Googled it and effectively researched what had happened to her and then copycatted the exact same attack on her. But as he told her in the apartment that night, he wanted to finish the job that the other Aegis, as he called him, didn't. He was going to murder her, he was going to kill her, he said, and he was going to have her buried in a plot of land. So really shocking and unusual case.
This may not be relevant, but I have to ask, because, I'm not saying there was any, I'm just trying to find out, why did he do it? I mean, this is unspeakable. Why would someone subject some other human being to such a sickening attack?
It's hard to fathom that. And I mean, as I said, Christopher Stokes was someone that she trusted and she had a friendship with. When the incident occurred, the two of them were in the company of another man named Timothy Feehan, who was in his 70s. And Mr. Stokes effectively coerced Mr. Feehan to bring them to a little shop where they were going to purchase alcohol, Captain Morgan's rum. And in the process of purchasing that alcohol, even on the journey to the little, he was assaulting her. And throughout their drive there and their drive back to the apartment, Miss Lee was being assaulted. Now, her rationale for that, and it was mentioned in court, so I can say this, is that Mr. Feehan Mr. Feehan was somebody who was a farmer with land, and Mr. Stokes appeared to be trying to get some money from Mr. Feehan. He wanted to I'm just trying to be careful what he was basically having issues financially, Mr. Stokes, the assailant, and Miss Lee told me that it was her belief that Mr. Stokes was trying to effectively get Mr. Feehan to give him money, and if she was being assaulted, that he might stop the assault by saying, "I'll pay you XYZ, whatever." But just to contradict that, Mr. Stokes, and this is evidence that was given in court, Mr. Stokes told Mr. Feehan that he intended to kill him and bury the both of them on his land. So, and he was charged with and pleaded guilty to threatening to kill Mr. Feehan as well. So Mr. Feehan is a victim in this, and he gave a victim impact statement in his own right, in which he said that he was terrified throughout the whole incident, and that the assailant was a much bigger man than him, and he was terrified and petrified, and he will forever live with the fact that he was unable to help the victim, Miss Lee, throughout all of this, and that he had to witness her being assaulted both in his car and when they were brought back into the apartment.
He pleaded guilty to that threats to Mr. Feehan. What was the charge against the violence against Miss Lee? Was it assault causing serious harm or assault causing harm?
So, as I said, this was a very serious case, and initially, Mr. Stokes was actually charged with attempted murder,
wow.
which we don't actually hear about too often. Somebody being charged with attempted murder these days, but that's a very serious charge, and he was about to go on trial for that when he pleaded when he accepted lesser charge of assault causing harm. Now that assault causing harm section 3 still carries a maximum sentence of life in prison, and he was also facing a charge of arson because he set the apartment on fire, and he was also facing a charge of threatening to kill Mr. Feehan, and other charges were then taken into consideration. So he pleaded guilty to the arson, the threat to kill, and assault causing harm, thereby sparing the state of having to go through a lengthy trial and the victim from having to go through a trial. But nonetheless, today he was jailed for 11 and a half years. So quite a hefty sentence indeed. And the presiding judge said that this was on the upper scale of severity. And at its absolute maximum, as I said, assault causing harm and the incident of arson carry a maximum sentence of life in prison. So he gave the headline sentence of, I believe it was 15 years, and then cut it down to 12 years, and then with mitigating factors of guilty plea and some other minor circumstances, I would say, in the attacker's favour, he cut 6 months off that sentence. So he received 11 and a half years. And just to note, Mr. Stokes has been in prison since the incident in 2021, and it was backdated to that date.
Yeah, that's you read my mind about the next question. So really, 11 and a half years, he will do 8 years and 7 months. Okay. But because it's backdated to 2021, you effectively cut 2 years off that. So it's 6 years and 7 months, 6 years, six and a half years. Effectively, he will be free. He will walk free. And I always try to, and I know you do as well, I always try to contextualize. If someone gets 15 years, I always try and work out, because we know you're automatically entitled to 25% remission. You can have weeks shaved off here or there for infractions. There is enhanced remission of 33%. But the minimum he will get is 25% off. So you're talking, he'll be out by 2029, really.
Which is extraordinary.
And she almost, yeah. So that's one thing I always try to do, just to contextualize the headline sentence and what they will serve or when they will be out.
Yeah, and look, a lot of people have thoughts about this, and since we published the story, people have made comments on social media that it isn't good enough, it's not long enough. But it's important to stress that the victim in this case, Miss Lee, she said she was happy with the sentence. She feels that she's a survivor. She said, "I'm a survivor, not a victim." And she feels she got some form of justice from this. And she says she wouldn't wish jail on anybody. But I think it's worth. We're going to play in a moment just a small clip of an interview I did with Miss Lee today, where you'll just get to hear her describing, in her own words, some of what she went through in this horrific attack.
Okay, so we'll listen to that now.
Interrupted you, but we were talking about the attack itself and how it started and how it was prolonged for all that time, and you felt you couldn't get away.
I couldn't get away.
Yeah.
He wouldn't let me use the bathroom in my own apartment.
Yeah.
I remember saying, please can I just go to the bathroom? No, you try to escape, you try to make money.
He told you to go on your own hands,
Yeah.
which is a disgusting thing.
Peeing myself. Then when I was on, I remember I was after buying a red kettle in a paddy shop.
Yeah.
Very distinctive red kettle. And in all, the punches and punches and punches. I was barely semi-conscious.
Yeah.
And I was kind of lying on the couch, side this way. And the pain, I still remember the pain. Boiling hot water down here and down my back. I begged him again, can I please get a t-shirt? I was screaming, crying, no, F yourself.
And were you telling him, leave me alone, stop hitting me, that type of thing? But
I kept saying, please stop, please leave me alone. Sure, no one cares about you. Your own family won't care for it. I'm gonna kill you. No one's gonna know the difference. I'm gonna bury you in Charleville.
did you believe he was going to kill you?
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. There was no doubt in my mind.
And when he put the fridge up against the door, was that, from that moment on, was it fear?
It was
right,
like,
this
what am I
is...
going to do?
Yeah.
How am I going to escape? My windows are tiny in Fair because they're only like two small little windows. And I could barely walk over the injuries on my back.
Yeah. I don't want to talk about the attack for too long because I'm sure it's difficult for you to relive it. But when he poured the boiling water and the ammonia acid, was that excruciating pain for
Oh
you?
my God. The ammonia acid, it's like, do you know, when a lady dyes their hair, it's ammonia.
Yes.
And I can remember the smell and my eyes being bloodshot, and 3 times there's a bottle of ammonia under my kitchen sink, belonged to him.
Yeah.
And he kept 3 times in my face. I was blind for 3 days. I couldn't see anything.
Yeah.
When I made my statement in hospital, the guard had to hold my hand so I could just sign SL. I couldn't sign my name. I thought I was going to be blind permanently.
But you heard her there in her own words, an incredibly brave person. And as I said, this is not the first time she's been attacked. She was previously attacked by her ex-boyfriend, Colin Ryan, and he received a sentence of 9.5 years with 2 suspended after pleading guilty to intentionally or recklessly causing serious harm to Miss Lee in 2016. And in that attack, he attacked her with hot water and he stabbed her as well. And she received a brain injury in relation to that, just like she did in this incident as well. So she's an incredible survivor and very brave to come forward with this second incident and to get justice. So fair play to her.
I don't know, Paul. Have you not? I mean, maybe just looking at it, maybe it's something I've been examining more closely because we do an awful lot of these things. But have you not noticed in the last couple of years there have been more horrendous cases of serious violence against women?
There have. I mean, I suppose I don't have the expertise to say whether it's on the rise. Maybe statistically it is, but also I would hope that maybe it's being reported more. And Miss Lee is a testament to that, in that she's now calling for other victims of abuse to come forward. And you'd hope that maybe there is just more of that, and I mean, I think the laws on domestic violence and that have become much stronger in recent years. So maybe more people are coming forward than they ever did before.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because we know that there is now an offence of coercive control. And if you remember, a Garda was jailed last year. I think, was he the first case of coercive control? But it was very serious.
He was,
yeah. So he's in custody now. So, and I remember the guards that it was the Protective Services unit, who are based in every Garda division around the country, who deal with domestic violence, sexual abuse, child sexual abuse, imagery, all the rape, all the personal attacks. And they were very keen to send out a message from that case that the guards will listen and the guards will go after anybody in coercive control. So maybe you're right. Maybe especially with coercive control, that victims and survivors are coming forward and there will be more justice. But look, what a terrible case.
Horrendous.
Now, just to move on slightly, you've had a busy week. On Sunday evening, we know that late last week, a man called Marius Mamaliga was injured in an alleged assault in Swords in North Dublin on Thursday. Now, he was critically injured after that assault, and sadly he died I think on Sunday night he died. On Sunday evening, I was speaking to a family friend who set up a GoFundMe page to speak to raise money for the family, and he made a few comments, but in between me speaking with him and the paper being published, sadly Mr. Mamaliga died. Now, a man has been charged with assault to Mr. Mamaliga, so we won't go further than that, but you did speak on Monday after Mr. Mamaliga's death. You did speak to his mother.
Yes, I spoke to Mr. Mamaliga's mother, Inga. Incredible testament to her to speak out and pay tribute to her son really less than 24 hours after he had died in hospital. She told me that she spent 3 days by his bedside while he was in a critical condition, and ultimately this decision was made to donate his organs after he passed away. No matter what way you look at this, it's a tragedy that a young person, age 19, has died. As I said, we have to be legally careful. Someone is before the courts in relation to an alleged assault in connection with what occurred in Swords last Thursday. But just to, I suppose, just give some insight, he was an apprentice. Mr. Mamaliga was an apprentice electrician. His mother said that he was a very independent person, and he worked in a restaurant in Malahide. He had his whole life ahead of him, she said. And she just described to me how basically they had dinner every evening, and then her son would kiss her. It was her tradition to kind of kiss 3 times on the cheek, and she recalls him kissing her on the cheek 3 times. He went up for a shower, then he went out. I said he was going out, and he gave her a kiss and said, "Love you, ma'am," and those were his last words to her. The next thing, she received a message that something had happened, and she immediately went up to the scene and discovered that he'd already been taken to hospital. It's just quite harrowing, and to speak to her, just to get an insight into, for a mother to lose a child in such circumstances, I can't imagine it.
One thing, Paul, there was another incident, a separate incident, in which a man was allegedly assaulted in Kilkenny on earlier this week. I think it was Tuesday night, and that man died as well. Now, a man has been charged again with assault in relation to that case. I spoke to, he was a Polish man called Rafał Jasna, and he just had his 37th birthday on the 6th of February, and I've spoken to some friends of his, and they all made emotional tributes to him. But let me ask you, because one thing I'm asked as a journalist, and you probably get asked this a lot, are you comfortable talking to loved ones of people who've died?
It's never easy, but I've felt over the years, because we are a tabloid newspaper, we most often are covering crimes and incidents of this nature, and as a crime correspondent, you are quite often the first to hear the information and break the story of an incident that's happened. And oftentimes I found myself, I've done the same, but I found myself attending scenes and doing that sort of follow-up, so to speak, where you find out who the person is, get a picture of them, and you speak to people who know them. And I felt it was my duty, and I think other journalists would say this, that it is our duty to give people an idea of who the victim is and who they were and who the person is who lost their life. And we do, as a result, try to make an effort to speak to their family, to their loved ones. It's important to do that, and we're not always met with kindness when it comes to that. People don't always necessarily want to talk, and you have to understand that this is the worst time in people's lives. They're grieving. Sometimes they're angry. The last thing they want is to be contacted by a journalist. But nonetheless, I do feel it's our duty to put that feeler out there and ask, would you like to speak? And you would be surprised at the amount of times where people have said to us, thank you for contacting me. I would love to pay tribute to my son, my daughter, whatever. And they want to. And we try to offer people that platform. So yes, it is difficult, but I feel it's important for us to do that.
I think it's absolutely vital, and it's something that I'm quite proud of. And I agree with you. I think, in my experience, now, the reason I was thinking about this for two reasons. You know, I wrote a novel late last year, which I've never hyped on this show, which I should, but anyway, that's another day's work. But I was doing a couple of, no, I don't tell anybody that I'm a novelist. But anyway, but look, so I did a couple of radio interviews and stuff, and, you know, Clareburn and that sort of thing, and it was more about me, which I was uncomfortable with, because, you know, you and I talk about this, we're not the story. But people do ask, I was asked a lot about what we call death knocks or doorsteps. And I actually think they're really, really important. And I actually think that, you know, from my experience, now, thankfully, you were sort of alluding to this. You do more of these stories now than I do. Nobody can say I haven't done enough, because I have done them for 25 years. And I am more than happy for you to do that, because I've done hundreds, probably thousands of them in my time. And they can get to you, and they can grind you down. But I do find, from my experience, and I've knocked on doors in the most trying of circumstances. Look, and sometimes I have been chased. You have as well. That happens. But people, I think, would be genuinely amazed by the number of times you knock on a door and they bring you in, they sit you down, they give you a cup of tea, and they tell you about their loved one. And I've come to the realization in my time, I think people want to talk about their loved ones. And I'm going to talk about my loved one, because I think this has bearing on this. In 2001, my father died in Tunisia. Heart attack, lights out, God love him, right? And it took us several days to get him home. And I was a journalist at the time, and all I wanted to do was talk about it. Now, other family members and other extended families didn't want to talk about it. I wanted to talk about it, and it was a real lesson for me, because it just hit home that I can understand why people talk to me and talk to you, and, you know, talk to greats like Conor Feehan doing doorsteps, because people do want to talk about and, you know, give memory to and tell the world about their loved one. And I think more often than not, we're brought in and we're given a good reception. People are entitled to react every way with it. But do you not think more often than not, people do want to talk?
More often than not, and even if in that moment, that horrible moment in time where they're not ready to or able to, you'll find that they do come back to you. In fact, I'm still having that happen even this week. I'm being contacted by people who want to tell their story long after the fact. So, I mean, it does happen. Oftentimes, us journalists can be accused of being insensitive, but in those moments, we're really just trying to have a person be remembered beyond a statistic. I think you told me that one of the first year I was in the Star. You know, every human being is important. You know, no matter what has happened to them or their background, it's important for them to be remembered.
And that's something I very firmly believe in. And that's one of the things I take great pride in our work in the Star. You know, we're often accused of hyping crime, but I make no bones about this. Every human life that is lost is a tragedy, and it is a disaster, right? And we put every human life on the front page. Wherever they're from, whoever they are, whatever their social status is, every life matters, and every life is to be remembered. You know, I'm not going to get into slagging other newspapers, but I often look at, you know, the way other newspapers treat murders, you know, you know, of very socioeconomic groups or ethnic groups or whatever, and, you know, and some were put in the front page and some weren't. But you can't say that about us. Every death was on the front page, because every death counts. And the reason why I'm asking about this is because I give a talk to students a while ago, and and this always happens. It'll happen to you when you're old enough like me to give talks, right? You're always giving your talk about journalism, and the first question is always the same. It's always a version of, what's your morality of doing this? And I'm starting to get slightly thick by it, because I think I'm a moral person. I think I'm a moral journalist. I think I act with morality. I think I treat people decently. I'm a hard journalist. I go in hard, but I do connect with people, and you connect with people. And I am very proud of the way we talk to people, and we remember the dead.
Yeah, you have a good line. I don't know whether you want to say it here on the podcast, but I'll set you up.
Go on.
You have a good line about sensationalism and about murders.
Well, yeah. So right. So yeah, you know, you always get asked about the morality of what we do, and one of the other things you always say we're always asked about is, we sensationalize murders, or we sensationalize crime. And my answer to that is, every murder is sensational. It's wrong. And and how can we sensationalize a murder? A murder in its own right is sensational because somebody takes somebody else's life. Or look, even that the horrible attack on Miss Lee. You've done a fantastic interview. It'll be in the Star and the Mirror online tomorrow, on Friday. Is that sensationalism? Some people can entirely subjectively say that's sensationalism, but it's not. It's going to the root of the matter. And what is journalism? For us, journalism is talking to the person. And that's what you did. So, I stand over what we do. Murders are sensational. We do not sensationalize them because they are sensational in their own right.
Right. Very
anyway,
true.
With that in mind, there's a couple of things I want to talk about. One, we've been covering the Gerry Hutch trial, as we know, and you've been doing sterling stuff, and we know that the verdict in that trial is due by April the 17th at the latest. But there will be a very important date on the 24th of March in relation to a separate case, but one which was, at the time, was massive, and that was the case of Graham Dwyer. I was thinking about this today. I wonder if we had the pod in 2015, we wouldn't have been able to do what we do with the Gerry Hutch trial because we know that it's in front of the Special Criminal Court, so we have a certain amount of leeway. And by the way, I covered every day of the Graham Dwyer trial. It was humongously stressful. We wouldn't have been able to discuss it and chat about it, but I would have hoped that maybe if we had the pod, we would have been able to do a sort of an extended court report, just to tell people what's happened. As we know, he was convicted of the 2012 murder of Elaine O'Hara. Now, he has appealed that, and we know that he had a serious ruling by the European Court of Human Rights about his phone data, so that went for him in a civil matter, but he's doing a criminal appeal as well, and that was before the Court of Criminal Appeal in December. And basically, they're trying to allege that the state misused phone evidence against them. But the decision by the three-judge Court of Criminal Appeal is on the 24th of March. So what can happen then? The court can uphold the murder conviction. It can quash the murder conviction and order a retrial, or it can quash the murder conviction and let him walk free. So Mr. Dwyer, if it goes his way, he could be out and about by the 25th of March. And that would be massive.
Incredible. It's a long time coming, this decision, isn't it? And I mean, it's been debated. I think it's being debated now in every court in the land and in every chat room in the land. It's interesting. I don't want to preempt the decision.
Oh, I do. What I'm going to say, there wouldn't be a pod if we didn't say it's up to the judges. It is up to the judges. But what I can say, I think, just speaking to legal and law enforcement experts, I think they'd be confident that the Dwyer will still be in jail on the 25th of March, we'll put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, there has already been some decisions made in relation to data retention and that, and then the government are trying to enact changes in the law so that will allow Gardaí to, in the future, still be able to retain data in relation to their investigations, because this caused a whole big problem for Garda investigations, didn't it, when it initially happened, and a lot of investigations were halted. I mean, you know something about that. Yeah,
we broke a story about this. So it was 2018 that Dwyer won his High Court case, saying that the retention of, it's mass data retention. It goes basically. People might know this, that at the time, phone providers and everything had to keep it for 2 years, all data, and then the guards could go and make an application from the chief superintendent in crime and security or security intelligence and get access to all the data. And the High Court ruled here that that was went against European law, and the European Court found in favour. So they are trying to bring some things in, but that caused a massive shock. And in one very, very sensitive area of policing, which I've already mentioned it, about the fight against child sex abuse material, what is legally called child pornography, which is a horrible phrase. So I found out that there were 700 men, as a result of the Graham Dwyer case, there were 700 men, all men I'm afraid, who were suspected of downloading and accessing and viewing child sex abuse material online. And the guards had 700 IP addresses. So that's how they get the IP, that's how they find them out. They get the IP address and they go and find out who owns the IP address, and they get warrants. But because of that, it effectively stopped. So there were 700 men whose cases who did not have the knock or the collar because of the Dwyer verdict. So it had far-reaching consequences. Now there have been, I think they found ways getting around this. And as you say, there are going to be more laws, but it was a very big case at the time. And certainly, I mean, I'll probably be in the Court of Appeal on the 24th of March. Bring back memories of Mr. Dwyer. So I await the decision with bated breath, I'll put it that way.
We should probably do a pod that day.
Well, actually, do you know what? Yes. So somebody did send me a DM saying that they're hoping that we might do, and I think this is a great idea. We might do, before the Hutch verdict comes in, we'll do a refresher of all the evidence that the state has had in the case against them. I think that would be really good, just to lay it out. But I think we should do one on Dwyer because, listen, anybody who remembers that case, it was massive. It really would. It was, there was Joe O'Reilly in 2007 and Dwyer in 2015. And look, there have been American documentaries made about Dwyer and all this stuff about his obsession with what he was into and also, I think it would be a good idea. So you were also over in Carrick-on-Shannon this week for the case of Dave Mahon.
Yeah, so this is. I just want to talk about this briefly. Obviously, it is still before the courts, but I can talk around some of it anyway. So Dave Mahon, for anyone who doesn't know who he is at this stage, Dave Mahon is the stepfather of Amy Fitzpatrick, and Amy Fitzpatrick is a missing Irish teenager. She disappeared from the Mias Costa area of Spain on New Year's Day 2008. No trace of her has been found to date. So that's kind of just how people would know Dave Mahon. He is the stepfather of Amy Fitzpatrick, and he is married to Amy's mother, Audrey. But in 2021, he was charged with assault in relation to a pensioner who lives in the Carrick-on-Shannon area where Mr. Mahon lives. And he has been accused of that. And since that date, it has been back and forth in the court down there in Carrick-on-Shannon, progressing quite slowly. And just generally speaking, people might wonder, because this is in the news and this is in the news and this is in the news, and it's not progressing. Generally speaking, the courts across the country have been stalled as a result of COVID, and there's just the sheer amount of cases there's a backlog that's unprecedented. So when I was in court there this week, it was up for mention again. Mr. Mahon and his wife were present, and it was stated that basically Mr. Mahon is looking for disclosure, and the DPP has not accepted his particular application for disclosure in the case. So that's stalling matters, so it's been put back to May again. So there's been no plea in the case as of yet. So we don't know whether Mr. Mahon, which way he is pleading in the case, and the victim hasn't been present in court every time that I've been there anyway so far, the alleged victim. So that's all we can really say about that incident. But the reason why it is newsworthy, I suppose, is because people would know Mr. Mahon as being the stepfather of Amy Fitzpatrick, and perhaps someday we might be able to discuss that case separately. God knows there's a lot to talk about in relation to that, but that's just the context, I suppose, of why we're covering that story, and we'll continue to follow it with interest. And
to declare an interest, I was there. The news came out about Amy in the first week of January, and it was a Friday, and we were in the Star, and later that day I went over to Spain, and so I've been involved with Audrey, Mahon, and Dave since then. And to declare an interest, I wrote a book with Audrey about Amy in 2012. So it's long been a case that I've been interested in. I just want to raise two other issues very quickly. You may have listened, I know Paul did, to my interview over on Monday with Michael O'Sullivan, former Guard Assistant Commissioner, who was at the time of the Regency in charge of the Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau, the anti-gangland thing. And I asked him about why were there no Gardaí at the Regency. Now, I have to say, Michael has been known as a very good communicator. But I'm not going to say I was shocked, but I was impressed, perhaps, by how honest and frank he was about why there were no Gardaí at the Regency. And to recap, basically, they didn't think anything was going to happen, and he said the Kinahans didn't have a clue. And he also, which I found very interesting, he said, look, the Kinahans, I named them, he didn't, were coming in every couple of days. They were going to loads of do's and events, and you just don't have the resources to follow them everywhere they go. And that also gives the lie. You may hear sometimes about 24-hour surveillance. I think that's a myth, right? I can only think of one man who was under 24-hour surveillance. I won't name him because he may have charges, but he was a very, very serious rapist who was let out, and I think he's back in, but he may have other charges, which I can't name him. He's a Dubliner. And when he got out of prison, the National Surveillance Unit, which Paul will know from the Hutch trial, the National Surveillance Unit were deployed to monitor him 24 hours a day because he was so dangerous. But then, they can't do that forever. And a few months later, he carried out another attack. But Michael just basically said, we have scant resources.
Yeah.
We didn't have any intelligence. What did you make of that, Paul?
I found that fascinating because that is, we continue to get from people, why weren't the guards there? That criticism is constantly there. And I think it's a fair criticism, and that's why it was a fair question to Michael. But it's the best explanation that I have heard from someone who was directly involved in policing and at the highest level at that point in time. Other officers have given other possible explanations as well, it's fair to say.
Yeah. I did speak to one former officer, and he did make a valid point. Looking back, austerity had shafted the guards. There was no money. A lot of very experienced people had resigned. Morale was on the floor. And maybe that was a contributing factor as well. Michael did talk about scant resources, so we don't know. But one thing I will say, a couple of guards have been in contact since Michael O'Sullivan's interview came out, and they thought it was they thought they were really happy that someone spoke so honestly and so frankly and said, this is why. So
yeah, because I'll play devil's advocate. I suppose punters and people maybe, because to be fair, Mr. O'Sullivan has an interest in that he was involved in the highest level of policing at that point in time, and would have made key decisions like that as to whether Kinahan and that should have been watched. But people who aren't so much in the know would have just simply said, media reports. From media reports, we know that there was an attempt on Gerry Hutch's life in Lanzarote in the December of that year. Gary Hutch had been shot in Spain in September, and there were fears, legitimately, and the guards did believe that there was a possibility that this could escalate into a gangland, proper full-on gangland war. So the criticism is, if they knew all that, why weren't they watching them?
Yeah, and look, I broke the story about the murder attempt on Hutch, Gerry Hutch, and then 2 weeks, 10 days before the Regency, I did a story saying, that the Hutch gang, as Dave Gallagher, the superintendent, gave evidence to their existence, were coalescing support in the North Inner City, and there were fears of violence. So that's all fair, but I was just interested by his reaction. Now, just the last point I want to make, we did speak about the attempted murder of Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell in Omagh in County Tyrone in last week's show. Now, Mr. Detective Chief Inspector Caldwell is still critically ill in hospital. We know there's been a rake of arrests. Some suspects have been released. The new IRA, what the media call the new IRA, have claimed responsibility. But I was absolutely gobsmacked when I read that four men from the Protestant community, now not loyalists, not loyalist tellers. If you remember last week, I did say that there were 12,500 loyalist paramilitaries. These people aren't suspected of being loyalist paramilitaries. They're suspected of being members of an organised crime gang. Yeah. But they are from the Protestant community, which is, it's making the news.
Fascinating.
And I was completely stunned by it. But there is a nexus clearly between these dissident Republicans and organised crime. And that was a real eye-opener as well, I think, for a lot of people.
But for you, I suppose maybe that's not necessarily a surprise in that... the waters have got muddied over the years, and there have been incidents of this in the past where it's first blamed on one particular group and then it turns out to be another one entirely, or even false flag operations. Would that be a thing?
Well, if you look at the Regency, remember the Continuity IRA, or there was a statement from the Continuity IRA claiming responsibility, and we've been through all this about even. About the Kalashnikovs, and was that an attempt to make it look like it was a paramilitary attack? But but it was interesting. I was listening to the PSNI. I had a policing board meeting with elected representatives in the north, and the PSNI, even though the Protestant men had been questioned, they were still saying, no, our focus is on the new IRA. So, but there is clearly a nexus and a link between elements of the new IRA and criminality. And they just happen to be Protestants. But it was just a big eye-opener, and I know all the newspapers up north and media and all lit on that, because it is one of those raise your eyebrow moments.
huge. No doubt we'll continue to follow it and see where it goes.
Yeah, but hopefully, Mr. Caldwell will make a full recovery, and I know that a lot of guards have expressed their best wishes for him. So I think that's the pod for this week. I really enjoy this format of just me and you chatting and having a chance to review and talk about the cases that we've been on all week. And do you know the one thing about this, Paul? I always say this: Sunday night, I go to bed and I wake up and I go, when I wake up in the morning, what'll have happened? And do you ever think this, that we'll be sitting there on a Monday and by Friday we'd have covered maybe 10 big cases?
Yeah, I mean,
you just don't know what's going to happen.
This week is a prime example of that, being all over the country. You just never know. So sadly, crime never sleeps, and it never stops, and there's all sorts of things to cover. But yeah, never a dull day.
Okay, and listen, we're very heartened by the messages we're getting from our listeners. We really enjoy it, and we really enjoy the interacting with people. So again, we have a few more pods planned. We're going to keep this going. Anybody has any ideas or anybody has any criticism, good or bad, there's no problem. We're all available on Twitter, publicly and privately. So keep them coming, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.